Hey everyone, welcome to SCALER. This is Arnav, and today on the first episode of Refactor, we are going to be discussing MNCs versus startups. This is a question that a lot of people ask me when they are doing their career switch, whether I should go for big tech companies or I should go for late stage startups or whether I should go for jobs at very early stage startups. So we will discuss about the work-life balance in these companies, the work culture, the compensation, and everything else. So let's get started. Now, this is a fairly valid question because a lot of times when engineers are going ahead and giving interviews, a lot of times with very similar sort of interviews and very similar profiles are there in companies which are pretty big. Like, for example, whether you take the FANG companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all of these, or even fairly large multinational corporations like Walmart or Adobe. This is a type of companies. And also there are companies which are a few $1 billion in worth. They are also hiring for very similar SD 1, 2, 3 structure. They have roles. And then you also have very early stage startups which have just raised $10-20 million of funding. They're just starting up and they're also hiring engineers. And the question is very valid because with very similar kind of interviews and with very similar roles, and also sometimes, at least on the outset, very similar compensation packages, you can get a software engineering role in any one of these types of companies. So the question is, which one should I go for? And also sometimes people have 2-3 offers from different types of companies and they want to evaluate which is sort of appropriate for me. And this is something that gets asked to me very, very frequently actually. And the answer is a little complicated than, let's say just go for the one which pays the most or go for the one which is the biggest company, because the answer is very contextual in nature. Now, before we get into that, which kind of job you should pick or which type of companies you should go and work for, I would like to take a while to actually talk about these different types of companies. What are the sizes of these companies? What types of companies I'm talking about? And what's the difference in how they work and what kind of products they're working on and what's the scale at which they're working on, right? So first of all, the easiest to identify one is the MNCs, multinational corporations, we call them. It's a fairly old term, which means companies which have offices across 20-30 countries. They probably are hundreds of billions of dollars worth, at least tens of billions of dollars worth in market capitalization size. Many of these companies are publicly traded entities. Like you would find their shares on NYSE or BSE somewhere. And when I talk about these companies, these are obviously the big tech group of companies which we say, which is including say Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Uber. Then there are companies which are maybe based out of US or Europe, but they do have hiring pipelines based out of India, across the world. So you would have something like, let's say, a Target, which has only stores in US, or Lowe's, which has stores in US and Canada, but they do hire from India because they have an office in India where they have a big development office, thousands of engineers here. So that's the category of companies which, when we are seeing, is, let's say, MNCs, very big companies. In terms of engineering team size, they would have thousands of engineers. They would have 5,000, 6,000 engineers. Or if you look at something like Amazon, 30, 40,000 engineers, not just employees. Net employee size might be in, hundreds of thousands, lakhs of engineers, but close to a lakh, or at least in that same order, number of engineers. Very big teams, which means there's going to be a lot of hierarchy also there, which means like if you are an entry-level engineer or even a mid-senior engineer, there are 7-8 levels between you and, let's say, the senior management and the CEO of the company. That's one bucket of companies, right? Next, the word startup gets used a lot across a very broad range of companies, I would say, but we should differentiate between what there's a lot of people in the tech industry called startups and scale-ups. So a startup is basically a very early stage company, and very early stage means it will have a tech team of 10 people, 15 people, maybe 20 people max. They might have raised funding, maybe $10 million, $20 million of funding. The company might be worth, $50 to $100 million in size. And you would find these kind of companies a lot. Like if you look at publications like say an Inc. 42 or Your Story, and you read that, okay, this kind of a company just raised funding, and they would be offering packages very similar looking to big tech, because they'll say, okay, this company is paying you 20 lakh salary, we will also pay you 20 lakh salary. They're giving you 30 lakhs of shares, we're also going to give you 30 lakhs of ESOPs. But nevertheless, this is a very different type of company. They would have few hundred thousands of users rather than having millions or billions of users. Like, for example, Google is used by 2 billion people. Like, Android operating system is used by 2 billion people. Facebook has, I think, across Instagram and Facebook.com and WhatsApp, they have 2 billion users. 2 billion is a very big number. A lot of times these startups will say, okay, we have 1 million users. 1 million and 2 billion is a very different thing, by the way. In India, having 1 million users is not that hard. I mean, a company 1 year old might have 1 million users. If it's, let's say, a primary product is, let's say, free social media kind of product, could have 1 million users. But you have a tech team of 10, 15 people. Things are very early stage. Things are just starting up. They might not have, obviously, they would probably be all remote, or they would have just one office, might not have proper setup. Like, there would be 10 engineers and they're all reporting to a CTO, right? So that's what ideally we should call a startup. And then there are scale-ups. So a scale-up is a company which is even like, let's say, our size, say SCALER itself. A lot of people in the tech industry call them as scale-ups because they are not a startup anymore. They are scaling up. They are closer to, they might be in a couple of years, they might be going and doing an IPO, right? So for example, we have seen of late IPOs of companies like, say, Zomato, which few years back, a Zomato or a Paytm would be called as startups. But you can't call a company a startup which is IPOing right now. An IPO means it's going to get listed on the market, and they have hundreds of engineers, if not thousands, and they do have hundreds of millions of users and not 1 million kind of users. So they are pretty large. So companies, which have established what they do actually. They have a product market fit. They have a product which is used by 10 million, 20 million, maybe 50 million users. And they are fairly large in terms of a team. They would have 100, 200 engineers. They might be launching new features, new products as well, but they have a core product that's working, right? And again, these companies would have, you might look at their software engineering roles. You would see that, okay, they have SD1, SD2, SD3 kind of roles, which sounds very similar to roles at a Google, Amazon kind of company, right? So India right now reached, for example, 100 unicorns. Very recently, the news came up, which means that there are 100 companies in India which are, more than $1 billion in size. Now, $1 billion in size means, let's say the 100th company, Pristine Care, or let's say something more recently, Slice. It's a credit card company. And these are companies which have reached $1 billion in size, like within the last 6 months, versus there are also, of course, companies which have reached the $1 billion size 3 years, 4 years back. So it's a range, but these companies know what they're actually building. They have users, they have revenue, the users are buying actual products, right? So it's a 3 kind of buckets. Now comes to what do you find different in terms of work in these companies itself, right? So let's discuss about the team structures, the type of work, and let's say how much time you're going to be spending at work and all of these things. So again, I would start off with the larger side of the spectrum, which is the MNCs. Now, these are companies where tech teams have been established for at least, maybe a decade, 10 years old tech team. Somebody like Microsoft is a 40-year-old company. So they have a lot of processes in place, which means they plan for a quarter ahead. Right. So things that you're doing right now, that, okay, this is the stuff I'm doing in this quarter, January, February, March, this is stuff I will do, April, May, June, these are stuff I will do. So they plan for a quarter in ahead. They have products that they have timelines which are yearly in nature, that, okay, this year, this new feature we are building, right? You can't really make changes to say the user interface too fast as well. There are lots of users. Say, for example, Google, if they change the user experience of their search page, it's used by people who are 7, 8 years old, kids who are using Google, to people who are 70, 80 years old, 90 years old, people are also using Google. They can't afford to make drastic changes to their products. They have to think through their whole user base, right? They are probably working in a lot of countries, so they would have a lot of compliances as well, like where the data is going to be stored, what are the legal rules around what kind of products you can make, what kind of products you can't make. They probably would be working with the government of many countries, where they're doing projects for the government, because these are fairly big companies. Like, Microsoft probably might be making, let's say, defense software or election voting software for some country itself. So they have to plan very meticulously. So these would have teams where there would be somebody like a project manager who manages the project. They decide the delivery timelines. They decide how many people are needed to work on it. There would be a product manager who decides what the user experience would look like, how the user interface would look like. Then they would have a separate design team who designs the user interface, and they would design it very meticulously. They would incorporate that our user interface has to be accessible, so somebody who is blind should have a screen reader and their UI should work with that. And all of these things have to be planned, and it has to be implemented by engineering. So obviously things take time as a result of this, right? And in these kind of companies, what happens is they because of the team size that they have to hire for a very diverse set of people across a lot of companies, across a lot of countries. And let's say if you go and hire in a place like Germany or Amsterdam, you can't legally make people work for after 5 p.m. there, right? So they would have company policies accordingly. They would have a proper leave structure. You would have to apply for a leave, get a leave, and when you have a leave that day, nobody would ever contact you because you are on leave, you're not available. So those processes are properly set up in these companies, which means that if the job says that you are supposed to work 40 hours a week, you don't have to work 41 hours that week. You have to work 40 hours that week. It's properly set up. These companies also, because they're publicly traded, it means they would be profitable companies, because you can't be having shares on the market and making losses. People are not gonna, keep buying your shares. So, it's a size of a company which is self-sustainable. 30 years, 40-year-old company means they know how to make money, they know how to make profits, they know how to grow. At this scale, they also can afford to overhire a bit. So you might say that, okay, this task needs only one person to do, but they would hire 2 people to do it. Why? Because, okay, one person is on leave, the other person can complete that work. So that means the processes are set up. It's not like anybody, at least apart from maybe, very senior management like the CXO suit, the CEO kind of people, or maybe senior vice president kind of people, apart from them, everybody else in the company does not have hard dependencies on them. They can go for a leave for a month and things will keep running. It's not like, if somebody is not available on a certain day, things get blocked and things don't get done. That's how work happens in these larger companies, okay? Which there are various ways of defining it. Some people might say it is slow. Somebody can say that, oh, that's peaceful. I can, peacefully work here without haphazardly things changing. And somebody might say, okay, things are very slow. I don't get to work on exciting things. And I'm coming to that. How do you go about, these different kinds of companies? Now, coming to, the other side of the spectrum, which is a much more early stage startup, which, let's say a company which has 10, 15 engineers, has raised $20 million of funding, probably $100 million worth, and they have, 50,000 or 100,000 users for them. So for companies of this size, what usually happens is that if it's a venture funded startup, right? The reason these kind of companies at this size and scale can actually afford to hire people with very similar salaries to a Google is because they are venture funded, which means, a VC fund has invested money in them. They have the money to hire engineers at this size. With these companies, although they are venture funded, and that means they have the money to run the company, but it does not mean they might have had product market fit, which means that they don't have tons and tons of people using their product and paying a lot of money. They have to figure that out yet. Their product, they might have just gone ahead and sold it to 10,000 users. They're figuring out what works, what does not work. And whatever works, they will have to do that more. And whatever does not work, they will have to stop doing that. Which means that if it's, say, an app, or if it's a website, or if it's a web service, then there are features which are going to get built, and then somebody would say that, hey, we don't need this feature, so it has to be scrapped. There are also going to be sometimes some big client, somebody is, let's say, in a B2B where they are selling software to some other businesses, and some big client who is paying millions of dollars says that we want this feature. So everything gets deprioritized, and that feature has to be worked on immediately. It has to be built within 5 days or something like that. That happens in startups. So also, because the team is not yet big, the team might be just one team. For example, in very early stage, there might be 2 teams. Okay, somebody working on the back end, somebody working on front end, somebody working on the mobile app. 3 teams. Now the person who is leading that team has to manage the people in the team as well. They have to write code themselves as well. They sometimes have to manage the project, and they have to do product management as well. Sometimes the product manager couples up as the designer. Sometimes the tech lead is also the engineering manager and the product manager of the project. So that happens, right? So you don't have a well laid out process necessarily. You don't plan for quarters or years at all. You usually plan for weeks. You usually plan for weeks and days even. And work might be very ad hoc in nature, which is like new things can very abruptly come up. But that said, the plus side of that is that you get to work on very cutting edge technology. Maybe some company is just working on a new video conferencing app, right? And that means maybe they're experimenting with new technologies on how to stream video. And as somebody who is even a junior engineer there, or who 0 years experience just out of college they've joined, they might have to work on things which pretty senior people in larger companies don't have to work on. They'll have to probably tinker around with different video codecs and different streaming solutions and find out, okay, what works, what does not work. Maybe something works for one-on-one calls, something does not work for a group call of 30 people. So they have to push the boundaries of the technology, try out new things. So it's more challenging. You get to experiment with things. Also, another thing is that people get experience to work on cross-domain things as well. Like maybe suddenly a new feature has to be made on the app and there's only 1 or 2 developers on the app, but the work on the app has increased a lot. So people who are working on backend might be asked that, hey, can you just pick up this mobile development work as well and contribute there? So somebody spending a year or 2 at companies of this size, they might end up working across multiple things. For example, I started my own startup after college, and I remember everybody in the tech team, they would work on front end, working on the UI. The same developers would also work on the back end, creating the APIs. They are the ones who would be responsible for deploying the site to the server as well. Now, these 3 things generally in a larger sized companies would have separate teams. There's going to be a UI team or a front end team. There's going to be a back end team. There's going to be a DevOps or a site reliability team which works on deploying the servers. All of this is going to be separate. But in a startup, it's the same person doing all of these things, right? And then there's a lot of flexibility as well as pressure in terms of work. Generally, people in these kind of startups would not be working 40 hours a week. They would be working 60, 70 hours a week. Work would be more. It's not necessarily more because they're doing a lot of things. It's because the unpredictability of work, people are working more. You don't have generally a company of this size, generally a standard laid down leave process. It's not like, okay, I've got 30 leaves and I apply for that leave. These kind of companies would say that, hey, you can take as many leaves as possible, but you figure out based on your own understanding that whether you taking a leave tomorrow is going to affect the work or the feature or the deadline or not. And based on that, you can just drop in an email or drop in a message on Slack that, hey, I won't be available tomorrow, I have something to do. And nobody's counting that, hey, you have 30 leaves, have you taken 30 of them or not? Nobody's doing that as well. But just because I have leaves left, I don't want to work tomorrow, that kind of thing also does not work. So it's a two-way street, right? So there is a certain amount of flexibility, but the work also comes with its own set of pressures because there are faster deadlines to match in these work environments. Okay, then let's come to the middle of it, like the scale-ups, which I'm talking about. Say any well-known tech company in India which has not yet sort of IPO'd, maybe products that you use very commonly, right? So let's say we're investing stocks to grow or up stocks. These are companies of this size, or you're ordering food and all through things like Dunzo, or you're ordering cabs through Rapido. These are companies that most people know about, at least people of 18 to 24 generation is the biggest consuming group of people. Maybe these are companies which have not reached the scale where everybody in the world uses them like Google, but generally they know what they're making. They have some sort of product market fit, but they have to expand the business, and they might have, let's say, they're selling things or they're marketing things and they're doing a lot of things manually. They can automate that and reduce that cost so that they can increase their profits. So they're working on these kind of things now. Obviously, they are also making new features and seeing if we can add a new feature and make people pay more for it or not, right? But their core products are there, so things are in setup. So what will happen in these kind of companies is that maybe, let's say, how your site gets deployed, that's automated. Maybe there is monitoring solutions available where you can see whether things are crashing in your app or not. Those things are there. You would have, at least for core products, you would have product managers as well who decide that what's working for the users, what's not working for the users, what new features we need to build, what the new UI would gonna be look like. You would have designers actually in place. Like many early stage startups, a lot of them, they're front end engineers. They're just doing design on their self, like they are actually making the UI, and while making it, they design it the way they feel like. That's obviously never going to happen at a scale-up size company, right? So at scale-ups, what will happen is that it's not like the UI engineers are doing their own design or something like that. You would have a design team at least. Maybe when you're making changes to an existing feature, you might not get new designs for that, figure it out on your own, but new feature getting made, new page getting created. All of these things you would have at least designers in place who can work on that. The tech team might not be asked to figure out what to do next on their own. There is a project or a product manager who do these kind of things. You want things, let's say you've done some expense for the company, you wanted to reimburse. There is an actual HR team. There are people out there whom you can talk to. So there are certain processes built there. But obviously, again, I think this is somewhere between the early stage startups and the MNCs in terms of work culture. Everything that I said, you can think of things come at the middle, right? So you can plan leaves to a certain extent, but again, most of these companies would give you a little bit of flexibility around those things. You usually do have a proper, Saturday, Sundays are not going to be days where somebody asks you to work. But let's say something breaks down in production, people might be needed to work on Saturday. Now, in larger companies, what happens is things breaking down in production itself, A, does not happen. B, if it happens, there are ways to sort of revert them. And C, there is going to be dedicated on-call teams which work on those kind of things. So unless you are on-call, on a weekend on-call kind of duty, then you are not disturbed on a Saturday, Sunday. But at a scale up, it does not mean that only there might be an on-call team, but something breaks down, then whoever built that feature might have to be called up on a Saturday or a Sunday that, hey, you need to fix these things. So sort of in the middle, right? And in these kind of companies, again, you do get to work on challenging things, but in a very different way. It's not like you're experimenting with a lot of things. You are seeing a company which is creating technology that was serving few thousand people, growing to serve few millions of people. And scale is happening. That's why they are called scale-ups actually, right? In that sense, your challenges would be that, okay, my server was serving 1,000 requests per minute, and now it's going to go up to, say, 1,000 requests per second. For that, a single server will not work, so I will have to load balance it. So these high-level design kind of skills come into play a lot, and especially if you are a little mid-level in your career, if you're 4 or 5 years experienced, and then you are at one of these scale-ups, then you get to learn a lot actually, because you do have certain responsibilities. You are not the one who is doing the low-level feature grunt work. You are looking at, okay, how will we build products that can sustain for the next 5 years? You are involved in planning those kind of things. In these companies, another benefit is that although the products are fairly well known, the user base size is also fairly large, the teams are going to be still smaller, right? Because the companies are not yet established. They are not 20-30-year-old companies. So if you are leading some teams, if you are slightly mid-senior in your expertise and what you're working on, you get to actually interact pretty regularly with the founders, the CEO, the CTO of the company as well. I used to work at Zomato at a phase when this was happening, and I was leading the mobile team, and almost every week I would have interactions with the CEO, with the CTO, because we have to plan things ahead. Now, even if you're leading, say, the mobile team in a company like, let's say Google or Microsoft, the thing is there's not going to be one mobile team. There's going to be 20 products or 20 different teams. The lead of the mobile team of that company is not going to talk to, Satya Nadella every day. Not even every month. Probably they might get to interact with him once when Satya Nadella has a, catch up with that team once in a year. But in these companies, you can talk to the sort of leaders, and you feel like your say matters. And it does actually. You can suggest things. There are going to be town halls where a lot of people interact freely. So that happens. So that's about the team structure, the work environment, and the work culture in these companies. And that's the reason why when somebody says that whether I should go for this company or this other company, and this is something that happens very often. I mean, I get a lot of DMs on social media, some of my students, former students, writing to me on email as well. Like, I gave interviews, gotten these 5 offers. Which one should I go for? Gotten these 2 offers. I'm very similar looking offers, can't decide. And people miss this context. This context is very important, because somebody says that, hey, okay, there's this, big company, publicly traded company which is paying me this much compensation versus there's a startup which is paying me this much compensation. How do I decide? Now, that is where all of this context that I was telling till now is very important, because you have to decide that what is it that you want right now. And from fair bit of experience, my personal work as well, like I have I ran my own startup, which was like a completely early stage, 0 to 1 sort of stage, where day one, me and my co-founder, we go and dust the rooms before the first batch of students came in. From that stage to growing that to earning a few crores of revenue, and growing a team from 0 to 40. That's a stage I've worked at Zomato when we went from some 50 million to 100 million users in downloads in the app. Went from 1 million to 5 million daily active users. Worked at Target, which was like a $100 billion US company, which has a probably mobile development team as big as the entire tech team of Zomato, for example. They had some thousands of engineers, and it's a 100-year-old company. And then, for example, SCALER is also a very different stage. So what I understand is that some people say that, hey, bigger companies are nice because you don't have a lot of pressure of work, you can take leaves when you want, the companies are employee friendly. There's a lot of people who will say that, hey, you go to big companies, there's no challenging work there, you don't get to learn anything, you stay there 2 years, 3 years, and you're not learning anything new. Go work at a startup, it's just exciting, latest technologies to work on. My answer to that is very simple. It's what do you want right now? Do you want to work on cutting edge technology? Do you want to work on experimental things, not knowing whether it will work or not? Do you want to grow very fast in terms of today you are doing things you have been told to within 1 or 2 years you are deciding what your team will going to be built? Do you want that level of growth? And it will come at a cost. It will come at the risk that the startup you're joining might not work out. It comes at the cost of working a little bit more, working on things that don't actually get released because it wasn't planned properly. It comes at a cost of little on-demand nature of work rather than planned nature of work. So all of these trade-offs are there. So you have to decide what is it that is appropriate for you at this stage. Somebody, if they have worked all their life only at larger companies, their careers will grow a little slowly. Fine. Is that what you want? That's fine. Maybe you do want that. There are people who would say that, hey, I worked at the startup, early stage, joined it IPO'd within 4 or 5 years, and I made 10 crore rupees in that. Fine, but they took that decision knowing what they're also leaving, right? So coming down to, I think, would say the final piece of the whole puzzle is the compensation piece, and how do you compare compensation at these kind of companies? So right off the bat, let me tell you something, is that compensation would have obviously a part which is in most tech jobs, fast growing tech jobs, you would have compensation which is divided into the cash component, and there's going to be something which is dependent on the stocks of the company. It could be a stock-based bonus, it could be RSUs, which are restricted stock units, it could be ESOPs, which are employee stock option plans. Right. Now, let's look at the largest companies which are already traded publicly. Like, let's say if you take a job at a Google or a Microsoft or an Amazon, your compensation might be, let's say, standard US compensation package for entry-level engineers is you get 125,000 is your package, but your package means there is about 90,000, 80,000 you're earning as your cash component, and another 25,000 you're earning in terms of stocks. The stocks are very much like cash in big companies. Only thing is, because you work at a company and you know what the company is gonna do next, you are not allowed to trade those stocks freely. You get, I think, one chance every quarter. You get a window every quarter or a window every 6 months where you can sell those stocks. But you do get, like, every 3 months you can sell or buy more stocks of that company, right? I mean, at least in a 3-month time frame. Whatever money you're earning, it's completely like cash only. Your stocks that you get, you can sell them off immediately, turn that into cash, right? So it's fairly liquid, your compensation in that sense. But your stock side of the compensation is little dependent on the company's fortunes. I mean, these days the market went down a bit, which means your stock part of the component, which when you joined looked like $20,000, might look like $10,000 if the stocks of the company fall down by 50%. That can happen, by the way, right? If you talk about sort of the late stage startups and the scale ups, there what you get in terms of ESOPs might look very large amounts. Like, sometimes there are packages where somebody says that, okay, 60 lakhs is your cash component job, but 1 crore of ESOPs. There are offers that are happening like this, or 20 lakhs as a salary and 80 lakhs as ESOPs. Now, first of all, that 80 lakhs will vest over time, which means that you won't get the 80 lakhs immediately. You will get the first 20 lakhs 1 year later. You will get the next 20 lakhs 2 years later. So if you actually stay with that company for 4 years, then only you will earn the actual 80 lakhs. You can actually sell that stocks only if the company IPOs or if the company gets acquired. Either of these two don't happen. Till that time, you can't do anything with those stocks. If you work with the company for a few years and then you leave, you might have to return the ESOPs. And I mean, we can make an entire episode on ESOPs itself. I'm planning to do that, to go into the details, but I'm just giving you sort of the brief summary version. So the cash part is actually what you will definitely earn. That's there. The stocks part, it's a bet. If you think that company, you really believe that's going to work out well, and you look at, it's a company that's earning profits, looks like it will definitely raise another round of funding or it will definitely IPO, versus a company which is making a lot of losses, then it's a little more uncertain in that case. I mean, companies like Paytm or Zomato, they were loss-making companies and they still IPO'd and they made a lot of money nevertheless in an IPO, people who had stocks. But does not mean necessarily it always happens. There are companies which might not be able to IPO successfully if they don't have a lot of profits going for them. For example, in US stock market, tech companies, when they IPO, they generally perform very well, but Uber did not. And Uber was one of the most hyped up IPOs of all time, and it did not. There was this company WeWork which could not IPO because they were not making profit. So even if it looks like on your package that okay, there's a lot of stocks that you're going to be getting, but that stock is not worth anything unless you can actually sell it. So there's that risk, but there's also the benefit, right? And generally these companies are going to be awarding stock grants which are fairly larger in size than the companies which are publicly traded, because for the publicly traded company, the value of the stocks are very straightforward. I mean, they could just, instead of giving it to their employees, they could sell more shares on the market and they can make more money. So they're giving it to you, so it's worth almost as much, right? Then coming to the very early stage startups, there the game is a little different. It's much more unpredictable, but say a company which is $100 million worth, in 5 years or 10 years, that company can become $2 billion or can become $10 billion in size. Which means that the stocks that you have, they don't go up or down by percentages. They're going to go up and down by multipliers. So you get 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs worth of stocks. It could be crores of rupees. But given that if it is successful, so that catch is there. Now, you would hear a lot of stories of people who joined a company at a very early stage, first 2 years, 3 years of the company. They stayed for 6 years, the company IPO'd and they made crores of rupees. Those stories exist. But for every such story, obviously, there would have been very similar companies in the same domain as they joined, the same competitors who did not work out, right? I mean, when a company, by the time it IPO, say, let's take an example of, say, Ola or Uber, for example, 7-8 years back, there were multiple cab companies. Some of them got acquired by Ola or Uber. Some of them have just shut down. Food delivery, there were a lot of companies. I remember there was like Food Panda, Tiny Owl, and many of these companies, they haven't sort of been able to work as well, gotten acquired, or they shut down as well. But Zomato grew enough to be able to IPO. Swiggy has grown enough to be able to continue to raise funding. People who have stocks at Swiggy, for example, they still are not able to sell it, of course, unless it IPOs. People who had stocks at Zomato might have been able to sell. So those risks are associated. But of course, if somebody got stock grants at a company like Zomato or Swiggy 5 years back, that money would be 5 times as big because the company has grown 5x in that time. So that obviously upside is there, but I would say don't consider that upside to be guaranteed. Do you believe in that company really? Do you look at that company? When you're obviously, if you're interviewing for that company, then you would know more about that company. You would talk with the people at the company and understand what they're doing. If at least to you it makes sense, you think that okay, this is a viable business, this will definitely grow in the 10 years, this company will definitely survive and a lot of people will come and use this product and they will make a lot of money. If that's something that you truly believe in, then you can believe in your ESOPs amount. If you think that this company will not work, let me just go in and have some experience here, let me work for 2 years here, and I don't really think this company will work out. I know a lot of people who say this, hey, this company gave me a very good offer, but I don't really think this company will actually survive for 5 years, but I just want to go there and work here and learn things. People think this way as well. If that's the case, then forget the ESOP side of it, because you think the company will not succeed, right? So all of that ESOPs amount that somebody is giving you, that's worth zero in your own head already. So then you have to look at only the cash side of the compensation. So the compensation story is very different based on what stage the company is in. The later it is, the more closer it is to actually cash, but lower the risks, but then the money will not really grow exponentially and it can actually come down because it's not a public market. Earlier this stage, the company, you have a lot of upsides, but you have to look at the risks and the probability of that actually happening. So I think to fairly summarize the whole thing, I would say the decision whether to work at a big company or a small company is not a general decision. I have given you a lot of data points. It depends on what sort of work culture do you want, what kind of growth do you want. Maybe you are in a phase in life where there's not a lot else going on in life for you. You can dedicate a lot of time towards work. Or you might be in a phase in life where maybe you have just gotten married, starting off with a family, moving cities. You want a little predictable work. You don't want to be on call very frequently, or unpredictable work coming up a lot. So it depends on your stage of life where you are and what kind of risks you can take up, right? So all of these factors will play in, and it depends on also finally you should evaluate the packages or the compensation that you're getting along with these factors. Should not look at, okay, offer number A, offer number B, which one pays me more and I can straight go for that. That's not the correct way. You evaluate all of these things, and there are other factors, of course. We can talk about that in other episodes about, let's say, whether the work is remote or whether it's on-site, which means on-site means you might have to move cities. There's expenditure associated with that as well, and working remotely, you might be performing better working remotely. So there are a lot of those factors, but at least in terms of size of companies, these are some of the broad points that you must keep in mind while deciding where you want to go and work for. So hope this helped if you had such a decision to make, or you plan on deciding between different sort of companies sometime in the future. Hope this helps, and thank you so much for watching. We will come back soon with another episode discussing something similar, and if you have any questions around what kind of things we would want to talk about, you can definitely write in a comment. You can definitely subscribe to us so that you can catch up more videos that are coming like this. Write to us, write some comments down about more topics that you want us to talk about. I definitely want to make more videos about that. Thank you so much.